insights and strategy work that we do can help organizations and individuals navigate through this complex world of choice, even when it seems very overwhelming and when choices clash with happiness. It's not easy to say or do, I'm going to choose to be happy. But choosing to be happy is a choice. Today, we're going to hear about the positives of choice and happiness, but we'll also explore some of the downsides. As Americans, I think the stereotype is that we are happiest when we have plenty of choices. And in America, there is a lot to choose from. We do have a lot of choices. Even in my home, asking the question, what do you want to do for dinner tonight, can be punctuated with bouts of indecision or deferring to someone else to choose for me. And why can that happen? Could it be that too many choices can lead to unhappiness, anxiety, or worry, or indecision? And especially so when a choice is made in haste or without enough information. Technology and social media can at times be powerful allies to help sort out what to do. But misinformation, misunderstanding, or societal pressure can sometimes result in a bad choice. Maybe pausing and being more mindful to discern a course could help on the path of choice and happiness. Today, with the help of our guests, Chris Wasden and Carrie Wrigley, and one of our own employees, Chris Tonay, we'll explore the pursuit of happiness in our hyper-connected and hyper-choice-filled world. I encourage you all to ask questions, use this chat function, and engage with one another so there's knowledge sharing and a sense of community in this forum. I'm personally excited for this session, and given the number of people who have joined, I can see that this topic is of very high interest. Thank you all for pausing your day with us, and our gratitude to everyone who is here today with us. So with that, Mari, let's get started, and I leave it to you and everyone participating to end today's session with all of us feeling a sense of happiness because everyone is choosing to be that way with us today. Thank you. Let's get started.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for being with us today. This is our 34th roundtable in the last 18 months. Since COVID started, we started this forum as a way to try to hit pause and talk about some of these critical issues. And this is a fun topic, let me say, in terms of being happy. It's also a hard topic in terms of the pursuit of and figuring it out. And so, as Mike said, I would encourage throughout that for each of you to be able to share with us questions and ideas. Whether you've got comments and ideas from what you're hearing discussed, put it in the chat thread. We'll have a few different times. We're going to have you all weigh in on your own sense of happiness and so forth. And if you've got questions, we'll toss them in. We've got kind of three main sections that we're going to cover today around kind of definition of happiness, technology and happiness, and then what does happiness really mean on personal, professional, and societal as the roles that we all play in our lives. Now, to set the stage, those of you who've been with us before, you know that we share our national tracking data each time when we engage in this. And I'm only going to share a couple of things to set the stage. We've been tracking over the last year and a half the national mood, how people perceive the things that are happening, and in particular, which words of the emotive words that we put in front of them, which words do they describe? About half of the country today expresses the most dominant emotion of concern. Caution and worry and anxiety are the next three, and hopeful and optimistic are at the bottom. If you've been with us in the past few months, earlier this summer, if you look at that yellow line, we actually were pretty excited and had a session when we talked about that rising a sense of hopefulness and optimism. And since then, we've talked about engagement and community. And then this sense of, as we saw toward the end of the summer, what we were calling that tribal individualism, American self-interest. We had some sessions talking about that. When we look at Americans by their overall outlook, we use some advanced analysis on our interviews that we do on 1,000 every week, or excuse me, every month. And you can find 3 segments, what we call the concerned realists. And that's always been either the plurality or the majority of Americans that are kind of looking at things middle of the road. The hopeful optimists, that yellow line there, you can see currently is about 25%, 1 out of every 4 people. It's a pretty dramatic change just from June, if you look at that, because we're talking about the entirety of the country, and a drop from about 40% being in that hopeful optimist to 25% as we see today. We've pretty steadily seen about 1 in 5 in that anxious worriers group. And that's a group that has those dominant negative emotions that they're feeling, but they're real in terms of the way they express in their lives. The last thing I want to share in our tracking data is we've also been looking at our response to the pandemic as a society. And I think this sets the stage around the societal happiness. We're in a very divisive environment right now, whether it's the vaccines or a health pandemic, which has become probably the most political issue in my lifetime and feels, whether it's that or whether it's what happened January 6th, the 2020 election, any of the social unrest around several other issues, we have been feeling as a society that we were driving further apart. It had normalized almost through the summer, but as we've hit into the fall, it's spiked up to where you have more than 6 out of 10 Americans feeling like, you know what, we're pretty divided on this stuff. So as we talk about happiness today, this isn't just about trying to have a Franklin Covey seminar about the right quadrant or time management. We want to think about deeper than that. What's the core essence of this idea of happiness? But then how does it apply in the way we are going to operate as family members, as employees or colleagues, as citizens or as voters? What is our opportunity and responsibility and accountability as individuals? But then what are the tools that we have in front of us with technology that can be leveraged to be able to help facilitate that pursuit in new and different ways? And today, Chris Wasden from Happify.com, if you don't know about them, I strongly encourage you to check it out. Fascinating and innovative and somewhat provocative ways of looking at technology in a different way to help us do the things that ultimately we have to control ourselves, but maybe looking at it a different way. Instead of just optimizing technology to drive ad revenue, maybe technology can actually be leveraged to drive personal opportunity to pursue what you're after. Carrie Wrigley is a therapist and author. I'll let her talk about her elements, but one of the things that I really enjoyed from her work is she's written different books, and one is the Happiness Toolkit. And she's going to talk from that perspective of the interaction that she's had with people over the years as to what that really means and how it really gets put into practice. And then finally, a good friend of mine and colleague, Chris Tonay, who he is actually about to leave on a flight with his family in a few hours after this session to go pursue some happiness on a little PTO. Chris is a senior director in our firm, and he is a longtime practitioner of principles of mindfulness, meditation, and others, and has a really not just calming effect in the way he delivers his thoughts, but he's got some real practical ideas that we thought would be really helpful to bring in here. So we're going to engage in this dialogue for the next 50 minutes. We'll close with a few final comments. We will have some thought leadership we put out after this. Melody Russell and our team has gathered several resources that we're going to put up on the blog post and the information we send back to you that we think will be helpful. But to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today, let's everyone engage real quick here. I've just put out there a question for you. Now, keep in mind, this is entirely anonymous. No one's going to know what your answer is, but let's just say for your own personal happiness, honestly, candidly, where are you right now? Let's see how many people we can get that feel comfortable answering this in an anonymous setting. Chris Wasden and Chris Tonay, Carrie, I'll let this be fodder for you as you get into your discussion with the group that we're looking at today. I'm going to give about 5 more seconds and we'll see if we're above about 60. We got 68 people. I'm going to give about 3 more seconds and then we'll go ahead and end this and share this results. All right, last call. Here we go. Okay, so on the personal happiness score, this group here, 1 out of 4 feels like we're very happy. The plurality, or the majority actually, feel like we're somewhat happy. And there's some of us that right now on a personal level are feeling like we're not too happy. Now, so keep that in mind. So about 1 out of 4 and 60% on that. The follow-up question that I'm going to ask on this is, now I want to ask on a professional one. Let's see how much this is the same or different. Again, totally anonymous. Professionally, how do you feel? Very, somewhat, not too, not at all. There's some differences in this number. Sorry, I'm seeing it before everyone else. Not super different, but there are some important differences underneath here. About 5 seconds. And you should, Dennis, be able to see the question when it pops up on your screen, depending on what browser you're using and how you come into Zoom. Okay, last call. All right. On this one, let's look at the results here. A little different, same general trend that you're seeing here, but now we have only 52% that are in that somewhat happy category. Lower 22 at the very happy. But then you can see there's 1 out of 10 of us that are not at all happy right now on the professional front, and 17% not too happy. So let's do this one more time. And I'm going to ask this one now about societal happiness, but I'm asking you not about what you feel about society, but how happy you feel as a citizen and member of said institution, society. So here you go. Let's see where that's at. And this one is a tricky one. Well, they're all tricky, I'm sure, but this one has a lot of dimension to it. About 5 seconds. And last call. Here we go. Let's look at this last one. Here we have on societal happiness. The plurality, half of us are not too happy in terms of that role. That tends to make sense when you look at what we see as the national data overall about division or disunity, what have you. Then, but you still have a third that are somewhat happy, 1 out of 10, very happy. And then almost the same number is not at all happy. So with this as a backdrop, what I would like to do is jump in and let's talk about from the very first section. And as I do this, Chris and Carrie and Chris Tonay, feel free to do any other intros to explain contextually your expertise, thoughts, and role as you go through this. But let's start with a very simple question, right? What's the definition of happiness? Obviously, I say that tongue in cheek in terms of a simple question, but Chris, when you talk about, Chris Wasden, when you talk about happiness at happify.com and the things that you're focused on, to what are you specifically referring? Like, what is happiness today? And in what ways is our life today so different maybe from past generations that introduces the need to maybe purposely focus on happiness?
Sure. So as a company, our founding was based upon 2 video game entrepreneurs saying, you know, we were really good at getting people to waste billions of hours of time playing video games. Could we get them to spend that time doing something more productive? I mean, that was the question. And so as they ventured into that, they became early kind of advocates of positive psychology. And one of the first people that we hired at the company was someone who studied under Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania in positive psychology. She got her PhD there. And as we look at what positive psychology really focuses on with regards to happiness, is the role that positive emotions play in our happiness. That people who think and use positive words, positive behaviors, positive emotions around hope or resilience or support or service or things like this are happier people. So if you're a Debbie Downer and you use negative words, you're going to be a negative person, right? So you can actually tell who's going to be happy based upon the emotions that they emit and the words that they use to describe those emotions. The second is engagement, that people that are happy are engaged in something that is bigger than themselves, whether it be an organization, a cause, a church. There's something that they believe that they're part of that's making a difference and that they're an element of, and so it gives them greater meaning in their life. They also have positive relationships. So they are not loners. They don't just sit and scroll down social media feeds all day long and not talk to other people. They actually have physical human interaction and relationships with people that are meaningful and important in their life. They also are able to enter into a state of flow in the things that they do. So they're so engaged in things that they believe in and they like and they support that they lose time. They lose a sense of location, right? They get so engaged, so engrossed in things that they're just in this state of flow around that. And then the final one is accomplishment and achievement, that they actually have a way of aligning these other four things in such a way that they can see progress in their lives. And they realize that they're on a never-ending road of progress. And they don't get bogged down because they're not the best or the smartest or anything else. What they do is they say, this is where I am today. And if I do the following things, I can then measure my progress and achievement over time, and I can show that I'm getting better. And these principles around positive psychology are really the same principles you may have seen in the last month or two. There's been several articles that have been published that talk about, psychology has learned what religion knew all along, right? So a lot of these things we talk about are things that are very common in religions around the world, as far as things that create inner peace and happiness, contentment, and joy. So joy is different than happiness. Joy is kind of that next level beyond happiness. And so part of what we've also done at Happify is we've tried to understand whether or not all of the talk about unhappiness today, and there's lots of, if you look at statistics around increased anxiety, depression, stress in society before COVID and as a result of COVID, part of the question we ask is, are things that much worse than they used to be? Or do we just have a sense that they're worse, but they're really as bad as they've always been? And so we've done a 100-year analysis. And in this 100-year analysis, we've said, let's look at how physical health has changed over the last 100 years. Let's look at how work and technology have changed over the last 100 years. And then let's look at family and social issues to see how they've changed over the last 100 years, to see if really the world is a different place than it was 100 years ago. And if these differences are what is really driving some of this happiness or lack thereof. And so let me just share a couple statistics. It's kind of interesting. So today, people sleep 24% less than they did before, than 100 years ago. All right. And there's lots of research that shows the correlation between unhappiness and lack of sleep. People that have sleep difficulties and sleep deficits are more likely to be anxious and depressed. People consume 44% more calories today than they did 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, most people were farmers and were very active and working in the field all day long. So what's happened is the service sector is now 4 times larger as a proportion of all people working, and this is very sedentary work. So we're consuming 44% more calories in a world in which we're doing less than half as much work, okay, physical labor, right? And as a result of that, you find that 100 years ago, almost everybody was normal weight. You didn't find a lot of people that were overweight or obese. Today, 1/3 of people are obese, 1/3 of people are overweight, only 1/3 of people are normal weight today. And so when you look at inflammation disorders like diabetes and hypertension, when you look at autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis and things, those are all heavily correlated with weight and how physically fit we are. At the same time, and this may sound paradoxical, at the same time, life expectancy has increased by 65%. 100 years ago, you were lucky to have made it to your 50th birthday on average, average life expectancy. Whereas today, you're going to make it to your 75th birthday. So the life expectancy, despite all these physical changes that have happened that have all been fairly negative, the advancement of science and technology have been so profound that it has significantly increased our life expectancy despite all these things we're doing that actually hurt our health. Okay. So then we looked at this work and tech area. And what we find is that the world is 6.4 times wealthier today than it was 100 years ago in real terms. So we've got a lot. If money makes us happy, we should be 6 times happier than we were 100 years ago, right? Because we've got a lot more money. Obviously, it doesn't. The other thing we look at is information technology. The amount of information that we are consuming as human beings today is 1 times 10 to the 20th power greater than it was 100 years ago. Human beings do not have the physical capacity to consume and understand and use the amount of information that we're being fed on a day-to-day basis. And this creates huge levels of anxiety among our population because it's too much choice, too much information. How do we interpret it? How do we use it? Then you look at tech adoption. So there's curves where we can measure the rate at which new technologies have been adopted over time. So new technologies like smartphones and computers and whatnot are being adopted at 5 times the rate that things like the television, the radio, the refrigerator were being adopted in society. And so what's happened is with all this new technology, it's being thrown at us, and then we're adopting it almost overnight. And this adoption creates changes in society that normally we had decades to adjust to, and now we're having to adjust to them in months and years. And then finally, when we look at family relationships, over 60% of people in college today are women. 100 years ago, it was about 6%. This has lots of implications on the workforce. It has implications on family structure. It has implications on incomes. It has lots of different implications around our society. And so this is a huge change. When we do surveys of people and we ask them, do you feel like you have social support? Over a quarter of people say they feel like they have no social support. And then we look at other things such as divorce and single parents and whatnot. And these are 10 to 15% times higher than they were 100 years ago as well. And some people might say, well, that's good. Some people might say that's bad. And I'm not here to say good or bad. I'm just saying these are changes. And these are huge changes from what they were 100 years ago. And so as we look at the totality, the physical health changes, the work and tech changes, the family and social changes, the world that we live in today does not resemble the world of 100 years ago. It's like a different planet.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, that's just processing each of those ideas and recognizing how it plays out in my life is fascinating to contemplate. Carrie, let me shift to you as a practicing therapist, and as you worked on the Happiness Toolkit and you've worked with people through your career, what have you learned about the source of happiness in one's life in the context that Chris just described that we're all living in today? And what is it that we're really after when we say happiness from your perspective?
Well, certainly happiness, as we know, is a sense of emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, as opposed to emotional, physical, spiritual, mental lack of well-being. The book that I wrote that you've referenced, Your Happiness Toolkit, has the subtitle, 16 Strategies for Overcoming Depression and Building a Joyful, Fulfilling Life. And I think we can think of that on a continuum. Sometimes we can think in terms of, am I happy or am I unhappy? Am I depressed or am I well? And certainly we can think about it as far as to what extent am I experiencing these different things? And sometimes, what I run into with my clients is if they're not 100% happy, or if they're going through a hard time, which again, the last year and a half, pretty much everybody has been, or if they're going through some kind of difficulty or disappointment in their life, then they think, oh, I'm on the unhappy spectrum. And if they happen to go in for a quote diagnosis with their provider, they're like, oh, you filled in 4 of our 5 little questions on depression. So clearly you have a chemical imbalance and you need our product the rest of your life. I think we can tend to get into that either or kind of system of thinking rather than what Chris was referring to. I likewise am a real proponent and fan of the work of Martin Seligman and the positive psychology gang. And as I thought about my own experiences just as a person and as a mom of 5 and as a counselor, what I realized is that there is a system that I've been able to identify in this careful observation of things that tend to promote that happiness, that joy, that well-being, that satisfaction in life on the one side. And there are other things that tend to promote unhappiness, depression, dysfunction, even physical illness on the other side. And Chris referred to a few of them. Let me just give you a quick overview of some of these, just to put some detail into this. I can go ahead and share my screen so you can see this. Again, let's see. This is not, there we go. This is what I've written about here in Your Happiness Toolkit, which was published 2 years ago. And then more recently, Your Happiness Toolkit Workbook, which was just published about a month ago. And basically, what I track is these 16 different strategies represented here by this little toolkit that exists in different levels. Some of them come easy, some of them are more difficult. And we can literally learn to customize our happiness toolkit to fit our personal needs and preferences over time. So let me just give.
Carrie, I can't hear you. Are you? I think you just went on mute. There you
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, sorry. Okay, so I was just kind of introducing some of the things that I've found in my own life and in my practice that are represented in these books I've written recently, Your Happiness Toolkit and Your Happiness Toolkit Workbook, of looking at the personal decisions we make from day to day in all the different circumstances of our lives that either feed our happiness or that feed our depression, our misery, our dysfunction, and so on. The first level of these, I literally call inborn traits because we're literally born with them. These are things that little kids are just naturally really good at. And again, you can kind of think of this on the continuum, either from 3, which is 100% happy, -3, which is 100% unhappy, depressed, dysfunctional, and so on. 0 is just kind of in the middle, just kind of, not great, not terrible, just kind of there. And then the other numbers are in between. So the first one, action, do what you love and do what loves you back. Kids are naturally active, in motion, doing stuff. As opposed to inaction, do nothing or do only what other people expect of you to do. In the spirit of what Chris said, more and more of us over this century, and especially over the last year and a half, are doing far more of this and far less of this. I know in my own life, certainly a lot of the things that I used to engage in that made me really happy, that I love to do in terms of performing, in terms of singing, in terms of going to the gym, in terms of spending time with my children stuff, suddenly a year and a half ago, those disappeared for a period of time. And it's required a little bit of, well, what else can I do to contribute to my happiness? I think we've all had to do some of that kind of adjustment. And what I find in my practice is it is people particularly that are particularly inactive, that are sitting around thinking about how terrible things are, either just kind of ruminating in their own heads, or even worse, watching media for 24 hours a day to see all of the terrible things that are happening. And in essence, doing nothing except exposing themselves to negative ideas. So
you went on mute again.
Okay, the second one, feel and express your actual feelings. Again, little kids don't need to be taught how to do that. They just do it. They naturally express their fear, their pain, their anger, their anxiety, their whatever. But over the process of time, especially in the world that we live in, a lot of times we'll numb, avoid, suppress, silence our actual feelings, whether it be, because we have to put on a good professional face, or because, particularly men are taught that they need to be strong, they need to, or, we might engage in too much food or too much TV or too much pornography or too much work even, or, too much heroin or too much of pharmaceuticals for that matter, to avoid, suppress, not feel our actual feelings. Here's the thing, you can't feel joy, you can't feel happiness if you can't feel. So being able to feel, giving ourselves permission to feel, just like our little kids do, is super important for feeling happiness. And again, over the culture, as Chris was talking about, I seem to think we have less and less permission to feel that, especially to feel it in front of each other. But that's something on a daily basis that we can choose to engage in rather than engage in the opposite. Positivity, notice and enjoy the good things. Again, this comes so naturally to little kids. They notice, they relish the beauties of life and the wonders of people around them and so on, as opposed to negativity, focusing on the negative in self, world, or others. Needless to say, a lot of what we see when we look into the media is on that negative side. We can choose to turn our attention, as our little kids naturally do, to the positive things, to nurturing those things, to giving our time to those things. Learning, develop new abilities and skills. Again, something kids do naturally from the time that they're born and onwards, versus stagnation, remaining stuck in old patterns and habits, just doing the same thing over and over and over again, which in many cases, I think that's part of what feeds what was shown in the poll, that we get stuck in jobs or in lists of chores or tasks that we have to do that are just over and over, kind of the doldrums, or we get stuck in the opposite, as Mari was talking about, that so much is thrown at us all at once that we can't really learn it. We can't really internalize it because there's so much of it. So we can get caught on either side of that. But to really learn something, internalize it, improve our lives, our families, our relationships with it is a joyous experience that we can choose. And finally, creativity, focus on creating rather than consuming. Kids come into this world naturally creative, naturally curious, naturally coloring on walls or doing little dances or doing little songs and so on, versus consuming, becoming a constant consumer of other people's products, which is what we're absolutely taught to do by our culture. 100 years ago, people made their own meals. They grew their own food. They made their own clothes. Somebody had to make that table. Somebody had to build that home or whatever it is. And the farther back in time you go, the more you find that people had to build their own stuff. Now we just head over to the local Walmart or nowadays, especially head over to the local Amazon, portal in our local device, which might be just right in our hands. And we just order what we want rather than creating what we want. We lose something about our humanity and our joy when we do that. So that's kind of the first level. And I find with my clients and others, if we focus on these things first, those tend to be the easiest things to regenerate because, again, we were all born with those things. We all have that capacity. And if somebody is in an active, say, depression or something like a -3 in a lot of these areas, they're not going to jump instantly to a +3 and doing all these things perfectly, but they can take little steps in that direction, in a positive direction, identifying a couple of these things. I'll just give you a quick look at the other levels. The second one I call level 2, learn skills. These are things that we tend to learn over the process of life, just in the normal process of growing up, say by the time we're 6 or 8 years old. And again, we can rate ourselves on a -3 to +3 level as far as where we are from day to day on these. Identity, know and value your unique traits and gifts. By the time a kid is in first grade, they know, what their favorite color is and what they're good at and what TV show they like, But in the world of today, we spend more and more time on this opposite level, comparing ourselves negatively against others. Oh, I'm not as pretty as that model on Instagram, or I'm not as rich as my friend over here that just got this 6-figure job, or I'm not as religious as this person that just got this new responsibility or whatever. When we compare ourselves, as we tend to do if we're just looking at images of other people on screens, it tends to feed our misery rather than our joy. And instead, we can learn to, again, focus on the things that we uniquely bring to the world and enjoy the things that other people uniquely bring to the world. Recording, write, and preserving our life experience to really think deeply about what we're experiencing and write it down, as opposed to just reacting impulsively to current experiences and current, tags and posts and just what is popping up in front of us all the time. And then what I call the 3 S's, seeking, sociality, and service, 3 different dimensions of connecting with other human beings. Seeking being looking to people smarter, more capable, more powerful than ourselves for help. Sociality on a peer level, reaching out to others to interact with them, to give and take and to support each other. And finally, service, to share what we have and are with others, as opposed to distraction, avoidance, and isolation, which, as Chris said, absolutely feed our misery, our sense of disconnect, our sense of dissatisfaction. And again, as we look at these things in the process of thinking even about the past year and a half, and certainly the last century, we have more and more of this, and we have less and less of this. But on a day-to-day, basis, each of us can make small choices to decide to move more in these directions, to do, more connection with other people, to do more thinking about what our lives really mean, to value ourselves and others more, et cetera, rather than these things over here. And then finally, the third level of this toolkit, I call advanced strategies, level 3. These are not natural to us, especially now. These are things we tend to have to work at. They're things that we have to kind of hone with a sometimes pretty demanding learning curve. So I never start with these, with clients. They're harder for people. Now, the first couple of these, Chris already mentioned, and sometimes I do put these earlier in the list because some people are already doing them. And for some people, they're the last thing they're doing. The first one, health, care wisely for your body and your brain. As Chris mentioned, 100 years ago, pretty much everybody, with very few exceptions, was doing that. The way that eating a natural whole food, exercising, going to bed when the sun went down and getting up when the sun came up. All of that changed with industry and technology because all of a sudden we can stay up all night on our phone. With electric light and with our devices, we can eat junk that came out of factories rather than actual food that feeds our actual cells and brains. So it has become countercultural over this past 100 years to do the things that human beings have done throughout time, throughout human history that kept them healthy. But again, we can make day-to-day decisions to move in the direction of health rather than the direction of illness and eating and consuming junk. Similarly, activity, engaging in regular health promoting movement. Again, this just used to go with the territory. It doesn't anymore. As Chris mentioned, many of us spend hours sitting and remaining sedentary in activity. And how it works for most of us is we go to work all day, we spend 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day looking at screens, sitting down, doing our work. And then we sit to drive home, and then we get home, and what do? We sit some more to play the video game or to watch the Netflix or to click on CNN and see what else happened bad in the world today or whatever. So we go from sitting to sitting to sitting to sitting. It's bad for us. It's bad for our bodies. It's bad for our brains. It's bad for our mood. And again, every single day we can make a choice to move more to activity rather than the opposite. Organize your time, resources, and living space. This didn't used to be a problem for people that just had the nice little log cabin with the 1 or 2 little chairs and, not many finances and stuff. But the more stuff we get, the more information we get, the more demands on our time, the more important this one has become. Our lives, as Mari mentioned, become so much more complex in the last little bit. So learning how to organize and order those things and choose between them and make choices about, what to give our time and energy to and what not to, super important. As opposed to disorder, living in chaos, clutter, disorganization, overwhelm, which has become the default for many of us. And then thinking, directing our thoughts in positive, productive ways. This is one of the things we can learn over the process of time to do, but that takes some time, as opposed to triggering, believing negative thoughts and simply getting triggered. Connection, communicating and relating well with others versus conflict, attack, or invalidate others in word or action, which is, again, in our recent years become so very common. And then finally, you can't see this, I don't think, is where the thing is, but healing from past pain, as opposed to just simply falling into stagnation. Okay. So again, as we look at all 16 of those strategies, all 16 of those components of happiness, I think it's pretty clear, over the past, certainly century and decade, but especially over the past year and a half, more and more of us are eating junk. More and more of us are sitting around thinking about how terrible everything is. More and more of us, because we think we're supposed to, are engaging in isolation, pulling away from each other, disconnection. More and more of us are, because we're sitting in front of our screens, are comparing ourselves with how everybody else looks and how everybody else is doing and feeling even worse about ourselves because of that. So we are literally in the very act of trying to fight a worldwide pandemic, creating new pandemics of depression, anxiety, discontent, not to mention the physical problems that result from not taking good care of our health. Every single day, we can choose in our own lives to reverse that pattern. It really is a matter of choice to get out and do something active rather than sit around and watch something else, to eat something whole and nutritious rather than something that came out of a box or out of a bottle. To reach out to somebody rather than just sit alone in our room with our screen or whatever. So those are the kinds of strategies that I found with my clients and with others, and certainly with people that actively struggle with depression and anxiety. Making some of those kinds of adjustments over to the right is crucial. And they're simple. They're just day by day, step by step little things that people can make small incremental choices toward. But as we live in a world, as Chris and Mari were talking about, that is more and more difficult, that is more and more disconnected, even For those of us that don't necessarily have a diagnosable depression or anxiety or whatever, it's real important to track these things, because my experience is the more of those things we move over to the left-hand side, the more we literally invite disease, both mental and physical. And the more we choose to move over in those things to the right, the more we invite and cultivate happiness, joy, health, productivity. Those are day-by-day choices. And so in a very real way, happiness can be learned. Happiness can be cultivated, even in people with some of those diagnosable conditions, and especially in the environment that we find ourselves in. And I think it's going to be a skill that becomes more and more and more important in the world that we're moving into.
Thank you, Carrie. Just some great tools building upon the setup that Chris, that you shared. And all things I think as we're thinking about this group here today, the way we can apply it in our lives, at work and just family and society. I want to get to Chris Tonay on your practical application, but I have a really quick question for you, Chris Wasden. When you heard those tools that Carrie was talking about, what's your reaction in terms of their application to helping people actually move to behavioral change to feel more happy? Any reaction you had to those quickly? I want to get to Chris Tonay.
Yeah, and I think this is where this intersection with what Carrie talked about and digital tools comes in. So not everybody has the time to spend with Carrie to do these things. They don't have the money sometimes to pay Carrie or people like Carrie to do these things. And so the question that we ask and we try to answer with our tools is, can we take the things that Carrie talks about? Can we put these into specific interventions or activities? We call them activities, but can we put them into specific activities that people could do that would actually change their behavior, that would give them experiences that would inspire them and motivate them to make behavior changes in their life? And to Carrie's point, kind of baby step by step, make these changes that lead to happier, better outcomes. And what's cool about technology is that technology is both the cause of our problems and the source of our solution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because and I don't need to go on the cause of the problem, I kind of went through that, but how is it the source to our solution? Is that through technology, I can take Carrie's brain and I can actually turn that into software, and I can take the activities that she has people do, and I can turn those into digital activities that drive human physical behavior. And now I can scale that. I can actually take Carrie to 1 billion people, right? And that's what technology can do. So that I could get 1 billion people at pennies per person to be able to use these tools to improve their happiness.
Okay. That's a perfect segue. Chris Tonay, we've become friends in the last year, colleagues in the last several months. I've been impressed with your practical application of some of these tools. And Chris talked about the leverage of technology. You and I have talked about how some of these things you can do by yourself, or if you have a coach or a mentor, or tech can help you. Talk about the practical application over 15 years that you've been trying to do in your own life, professionally and personally.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, all great stuff from Carrie and Chris. I definitely am a believer in leaning into the positive psychology. And the technology can be a great motivator and engager to get us to work on these things. But the question at the end of the day, to me, is what are we actually looking for? Are we chasing a positive state? Are we chasing a positive emotion that we know will eventually pass away? All things arise and pass. Every thought comes and goes. Everything we feel, positive or negative, arises and goes away. So what do we do about that? What's the actual problem? The problem is clinging. The problem is clinging to the positive and clinging to the negative. And what we can do is we actually have tools that can be very much facilitated and enabled through technology. It can be taught through a technology, but teaching folks how to pay attention in the present moment over and over again so that you can begin to see these things arise and pass away. So that you can begin to see that thoughts are like clouds in the sky. Emotions are like clouds in the sky. They arise, they pass away, they come, they go. But at the end of the day, you are not your emotions. You are not your thoughts. You are the sky. So how can you learn to be the sky? by watching things arise and pass without clinging to them. And this is very difficult, but it comes through practice. That's what mindfulness is. It's paying attention in the present moment and watching these things come and go and building enough concentration that you begin to see them arise and fall so that you can stop clinging to a degree, change your relationship to these thoughts and emotions. It's something you can tangibly do. The path Carrie described is very well thought out, very awesome. But like at the end of the day, it brings to mind for me, like, well, what do I do? Like right now, what do I do right now? And what I do right now is I pay attention and I watch and I see the thought arise. Do I follow that thought? Do I give that thought fuel? If it's a positive thing, sure, I can lean into it. If it's a negative thing, I can let that go. And it's through that we gain freedom. And that's how I very much have changed my life, how this practice has changed my life very much, both personally and professionally, by seeing these things arise and fall and not attach to them. Yes, I get emotional. I'm a very passionate guy. You know, my passion comes to life, but I'm not attached to it, you know, because I'm not in it. I don't believe I'm the cloud. I know I'm the sky. So it's to me, it's a lot simpler than what was just described. You know, those are tools and techniques that can get you to what I'm describing, but why not go straight to the source? Go straight to the answer. And straight to the answer is changing our relationship to our thoughts and emotions, changing how we see them arise and pass away. And to such a degree that you can unlearn the anxious habits, because anxiety is a habit. It's a mental habit that we repeat over and over again. And when we see the anxiety come up, we can look at it with curiosity. Why is that happening? And in that curiosity, I can let it go. So it's fascinating. And it really can change by changing your relationship with those things. You're no longer taking them so personally. You're no longer taking them as, me, I feel this, I feel that. It's, these things happen. It's okay. And it's in that tranquility and in that peace that we find what I believe we're all pointing to, which is happiness. And that's, and it can change a lot because it also changes how you interact with your coworkers, how you interact with your job, how you interact with your life, when you're no longer clinging to these things, clinging to the positive or clinging to the negative.
Thank you, Carrie. When you think about that, and Chris, getting really to the practical, you've got the theoretical and the specific elements that we're trying to get to the happiness. How have you found this? We've got a predominantly business audience here that works across all different sectors across the country. How does this become manifest and important within the workplace? And when you've worked with people, or if you can just think on the fly as you think about the application of the principles and the tools you just went through, what is the practical implication for employers and for colleagues within the workplace in the pursuit of happiness today?
I think it's hugely important. I don't think I have to tell any of the business leaders here that depression and anxiety are among your most costly problems, you know, between insurance costs and lost work days. And certainly, you know, if people have to take time off work because it's depression is the most common form of disability, has been for about a decade now. And that costs on a business level, you know, and certainly if you have to have turnover, different things. So creating an environment is actually one of the objectives that I had in outlining those 16 things, because certainly, you know, for myself personally, I can decide to move to the right versus move to the left. You know, as I'm a mom of kids, I'm going to feed them this or that. I'm going to have them watch this or that. I'm going to have them engage in this or that behavior to be able to see in clear terms, this will feed wellness, this will feed misery. So even more powerfully for a business leader who's in charge of, you know, dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, am I going to put them in an environment, for example, where they're just sitting all day, every day, stressed to the max without any, you know, ability to move? Or am I going to build in a schedule where they get to, you know, stand up and move around a little bit, interact with each other, maybe even provide a gym if we have the resources to do so? You know, am I going to, you know, choose a medical plan that doesn't just pay for problems after they arise, but that actually perhaps rewards healthy behaviors? My
Mhm.
husband has been fortunate to be involved in one of those systems. Every year we go, both me and him, me as his spouse, and we do a healthy Utah checkup, and we're encouraged with things like nutrition and exercise, and given financial rewards if we meet certain goals and stuff like that. And having it part of the business location. I'll tell you, my brother just took a new job for a company here in downtown Salt Lake that does that in a really active way. They provide a gym, and they provide time during their workday for their employees to go and work out, a half hour a day, whatever, have nice little showers, whatever, and my brother has never been happier in a job, partly because of that, partly because of the culture. The cool thing about knowing about these specifics is you can literally, whether it's in a home, a school, a business, a family, whatever, you can literally build a culture that feeds happiness rather than a culture that feeds misery. And that has, huge things to do with retention of good employees, with productivity, because an unhappy employee is not going to do a real happy job with your customer. Happiness breeds happiness. So rewarding the things that make for happiness and structuring those into the workday, I think, can be really, really powerful in a business context.
So it sounds like taking those principles and creatively thinking about how could we deploy in our workplace any one of those 4 levels of principles to help facilitate.
Yeah.
Now, I put out a question to everybody. If you see it there, weigh in real quick. But Chris Wasden, I want to ask you this. Rick Reinhardt was asking the tension between the new virtual work world and the desire to create a real life, social, connected workplace. So I want to tie these two together with that question. So I've asked everybody right now, friend or foe, when it comes to tech. And this group, 60%, I'm going to end it right now. We'll share 3, 2, 1. Here we go. 60% of this group believes that it's their friend, 40% their foe. Talk to me, Chris, from your perspective. How do you think this tension of a new virtual workplace, but wanting to have in real life connections, what's that tension? How does it play out, and how does technology help and do a better job in making that real? What do you think?
So tension is my favorite word. I've written a book entitled Tension, the Energy of Innovation. So I'm a big believer that tension is a powerful force in our lives and our organizations. Part of what I point out in my book, though, is that there are 3 different types of tension. There's maladaptive tension that causes things to get worse. There's adaptive tension, which causes things to get a little bit better. And there's creative tension, which enables things to get a lot better. So as we look at what's happened with this virtual work environment and the tensions that it's created, it's, for many people, been very maladaptive. If you look at me as an example, right, I work for a company headquartered in New York City. So my day starts at 7 a.m. Okay. And I can tell you, I'm not one of the sort of people that's going to wake up at 5 a.m. to do my exercise to make a 7 a.m. call. So I end up starting my day at 7 a.m. And then I have on average 13 to 14 meetings per day in my calendar. And so I'm bouncing from call to call to call, Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, all during the day. And then during that day, I've gotten really no work done, right? Because I haven't had any thoughtful opportunities to really get in flow. It's just going from schedule to schedule. And so any sort of the creative work I need to do ends up having to be done after that time or on the weekends. And so before the virtual world of Zoom, my schedule wasn't that way. I never had a day with 14 meetings in it, right? And so technology has enabled this scheduling and regimen in your life that doesn't allow thoughtful creative time. And now I realize I'm not the norm, and I'm a leader in a company, and I've got other people that work in companies that have large blocks of time that can be structured around more creative pursuits. But I think for many of us, it has robbed us of thoughtful time, creative time, time for exercise. So it's been a challenge. Having said all that, I have a Peloton bike. And so, what do? Well, because of technology, I have this cool thing. And yesterday, one of my people wanted to have a meeting with me at 4 o'clock, and I'd already been on the phone call since 7 a.m. And I said, look, I'm done. I didn't exercise yesterday. I've got to exercise today. I'm going to go down to my Peloton. It was cold here in Utah and snowy, so I wasn't going to go outside. So I'm able to use that technology to enable me to have some physical activity that would have been more difficult to do in a cold day and whatnot. So you try to use it both ways, but I think for most people, the virtual world, while it's given us flexibility, I don't travel as much. I used to travel 3 weeks out of the month. Now I travel maybe 1 week out of the month. So that's better in many dimensions, but it's created new tensions and new stresses. And I think we have to figure out how we adapt. So my 3 types of tensions, right? So for many of us, it's been maladaptive tension. And the trick in innovation is, how do you take a maladaptive tension and transform it into an adaptive tension or a creative tension? And if we can do that, then we actually get improvement in our lives by having the ability to adapt or create. And this gets into the final comment on Carrie's, which is on culture. Culture is the most important, but the most difficult thing for organizations to create. That is a positive culture. I wrote another book recently called Solving for Why. And the Solving for Why message is that if people can align their personal why with an organizational why that's aspirational, then they can be happier than if the organization has a why which is different than my personal why and we're not actually working together. And most organizations actually don't have a very good why themselves. And I think all organizations struggle to really come up with a why that is inspirational, that will align their people with it, so that you can then have a culture that supports health and happiness.
Thank you. Chris Tonay, besides practicing in your own life, you consult clients on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Wrap us up. I know this will be a fun question for you in a couple of minutes at the very end. What are the implications for companies operating in society today that maybe go beyond just the way they work with their employees, but the way they are as citizens in society? What do you think this means in terms of the application of happiness and the pursuit of it and the use of technology? Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's all about the relationship to technology. It can be so positive, but like, we need to check in with ourselves and our bodies. How do I feel when I'm doing this? Do I feel tense? As I'm writing this email, how do I feel? What am I feeling in my body? Is there tension? Is there openness? The technology is a tool. It's about how we're relating to that technology. And I think that, and also it's that attitude that you carry through your life. And how am I relating to my clients? Am I coming with judgment? Am I coming with love? Am I coming with compassion? How am I relating to my child, to my wife, to my friends? It's just like research, right? We can only control the variables we can control. There's so much out of our control. So hone in on what you can control. You can control your relationship. You can control how you interact. And it's by taking that moment by moment and trying to pay attention and trying our best as we can. We're human, we're going to fail. And doing that in every interaction with technology, interaction with clients, interaction with everyone. It's only what you can control. And if we each kind of move into that and feel that attitude, then the world starts to lift, because that love and that compassion comes through, and people feel that. They know when that's genuine, so to me, that's how we can try to make this push and make this a better place, just by cultivating that attitude. Is, how do I feel and what's my relationship to this thing?
Perfect close as we get here. Believe it or not, with the top of the hour, I'd love to keep going for another hour on additional things.
Yeah.
You need to check out what's on happify.com and what they're doing. It's very cool. We'll distribute, obviously this will be recorded. This has been recorded. You could look at it, but the tools that Carrie shared, just fascinating. Taking those applications, leverage them, and we'll get those out there. I want to turn to Dee Alsop, our co-CEO, for a close, and then we'll wrap up for today. And thank you all. Dee?
Thanks, Maury. And as Maury mentioned, I am the co-CEO with Mike Davity, and we just want to thank our guests here, Chris Wasden, Chris Tonay, and Carrie Wrigley, and your preparation and your experience that you were able to share with us today. That was just very special, and really appreciate and wanted to thank you for that. And thank all of you as our guests that come each month to these sessions, our clients and others that we work with and friends. And we appreciate your continued support for these sessions and your interest in them, and also for inviting us to help you with some of the challenges and problems that you face in your businesses. We thank you very much for that. And then lastly, I think Chris Wasden, you were mentioning how technology, whether we want it or not, is coming at a rate about 5 times what it was in earlier generations. And seeing and understanding these new technologies really is key for us as individuals and businesses. Next month in our roundtable, we're going to be talking about one of those technologies. That's a full 5G wireless network and what that does and the challenges that presents to us as individuals and businesses. And so we'll have another set of experts, and we'll be focusing on that kind of new technology and its impact on us. And we invite all of you to come and join us for that other topic. So thank you very much for everyone.
Be happy.
All right, see ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Great session.